All right. We will let folks join as they can. Hi, everyone. My name is Avery Cullinan. I am the communications manager at America's All In. Thank you for joining our call today. Hannah, do you mind sharing? There you go. Thank you. So I don't think this needs any reminder, but as you all know, we are 1 week out from the US elections, and the week following that is COP29, the Global Climate Conference. So there are a bunch of things coming up that the America's All In Coalition, our members, our partners are all actively thinking about, working on, stressing about, etc. And so we thought that now was a good time to come together and for us to share some upcoming opportunities to work together, to collaborate, and some resources to help you all in your work. So the first half of this call, we will be focusing on communications. And then the second half, we'll be talking through COP29, some of the policy priorities and outcomes that will be the focus of those climate talks, and the role of US stakeholders and subnational leaders. And then we will leave the last 15 minutes for any partners who are planning to go to Azerbaijan, making sure that you all have the resources you need so you can ask any questions. We can share, more logistical support. So folks who are not going, you can jump off for those 15 minutes, or if you have members of your team that are going and you want to stay on and share that information, we encourage you to do that. And yes, we can share a recording. So we're going to jump in on the communication side of things. If you can go to the next slide. As I mentioned, there are a couple important communications moments coming up, and wanted to walk through them kind of phase by phase. So first, a lot of us are really thinking through our election response and looking ahead to communications at COP29, but there is a very clear communications opportunity right now and over the next week that is leading up to the election. I don't know if folks saw, but there was a recent poll from Politico that found that even now, 3 out of 10 Americans see the benefits of the IRA and other federal funding policies in their communities and in their individual lives. And I think that we all have a lot of stories and clean energy success stories that we can share now that can show people the ways in which this is impacting their lives today. And now is the time to do that, all the way through Election Day. And even on Election Day, while we may not learn the results of the election that day, there may be early local wins that we can really highlight, and celebrating those will be key. Then I'm not going to guess when the election results come out. I could say it and I'm sure I would be wrong, but whenever they do, there will be a real clear need for a rapid and coordinated response from subnational climate leaders within the US, whether it is seizing the moment and capitalizing on a narrative that this is a win for climate, or reminding folks of the importance of our coalition. And that will carry through into COP29, in which it will be really important for us to, again, have a coordinated message and remind folks of the all of society role that subnational actors can play and have a very clear and needed voice in global climate talks. So we'll walk through all of that today, but just wanted to kind of lay out the month or so ahead. So if you go to the next one, so again, as I mentioned, storytelling is really critical, both in the next week and in our work across the board. There are a lot of big numbers, funding numbers, megawatts of clean energy, people reached, jobs created, but there is a very clear role for storytelling in doing that job of making people see these benefits in their communities, so they can see how the solar panels on their church is saving money so that the church can do other community outreach, or how electric school bus investments are making sure that their kids can be on a cleaner and healthier and safer bus ride to school, or how Justice 40 funds are helping people who have solar panels on their garage and are helping their neighbors charge their phones and store their medicine during hurricanes, can make those into real resilience hubs that have wider and wider impact. So that's kind of what these three stories tell, and what a lot of the stories on americasallin.com, the storytelling that we have really emphasized. But I know that all of you have storytelling efforts as well, and you have stories that can really resonate with the constituents that you talk to on a regular basis. And so while we have resources, we encourage you to share your own stories. It doesn't need to be heavily produced videos like these. It can be, making sure that those are a part of your talking points when you're talking to media, and making sure that your social copy is bringing in people and real stories while you're promoting other programs that you have. This storytelling is really critical for instilling trust in the government, making sure that they really see how government policies are helping in their everyday lives. It can really personalize policy, making sure that people see themselves in it. So wherever you can tell a unique and specific story to your community, we encourage you to do so. And this is really a good way for people to see themselves in the stories that we tell. And that is a great way to rise above the noise, which I think we all know is very noisy right now. And one of the best ways to rise above that is for people to see themselves in the communications that we're putting out there. And that is why we all know our audiences very well, and we need to speak specifically to them and tell those stories and use the communications that we know work for our audiences. So with that in mind, we have brought on Kristen from We Mean Business. They have done some recent polling and message testing and a lot of work to figure out the best way for businesses specifically to communicate. And so I'm going to pass it to Kristen to present some of their awesome work.
Thank you so much, Avery, and hi, everyone. I'm Kristen King, Deputy Director of Campaigns and Communications at the We Mean Business Coalition. And for those of you who may not know us, we are a coalition of 7 nonprofit partners that coordinate together around the world on business action on climate change and leverage what the private sector is doing to drive further action and influence policy at the international and national level. So a very big moment coming up for us next week with the election coming up and influencing the future direction of climate policy in the US. And we know that for businesses, the recent waves of backlash on ESG and other environmental efforts have driven companies to become weary or hesitant to speak about climate action publicly. It's a very unique challenge for business, but it's clear that this type of backlash is politically driven, and our new research is showing that this sentiment is not in line with what consumers and investors are looking for and what they're expecting of companies on climate action, which is very good news. If we could go on to the next slide. This is our new messaging guide that we have released with our partners at Potential Energy and Meslansky and Partners for companies to use. And it's full of data that we did in the US and a handful of other countries as a comparison and benchmark. And the data is overwhelmingly clear that there is a real return on responsibility. And for those companies that are taking climate action and talking about it publicly, it's simply good for their business. And the companies that do so are going to be better positioned to reap the many different benefits that companies can seize. Brand benefits, because companies are more likely to buy their products and want to work for them and speak highly of them in their communities. So I've got a snippet of some of the research findings here to go through with you. And for anyone who'd like to learn more, we are hosting a webinar tomorrow morning to go through this with the lead researcher and dive in with businesses. I'll get to that in just a moment and share those details. But here you can see from our consumer and investor polling that loud and clear, they are perceiving climate risk as business risk as it is. And that's in the US and in the 5 other countries where we tested, which were the UK, France, Germany, Brazil, and Japan. Consumers agree that climate change is affecting companies across different industries. And across the political spectrum, we're also seeing that investors are taking these risks very seriously and looking at that when they're looking to invest in companies. If you want to move to the next slide. There are also a range of benefits that companies can be taking advantage of for speaking about their climate action as well. We're seeing that investors are expecting the companies investing in clean energy to outperform both in the short and the long term. And they're more likely to invest in companies, and the consumers are more likely to buy the products from companies that are committed to reaching their net zero goals, switching to clean energy, et cetera. And on the next slide, we've got a view here of the polling in different countries where consumers responded to whether they were more likely or less likely to buy from a company, taking certain actions and speaking about that publicly on climate. So the blue is overwhelmingly the positive. And on the far right, you can see the only negative sentiment really showing up across the board was when companies announced that they were going to continue investing further into fossil fuels. So a real loud and clear advantage here for businesses. And on the next slide, we took these research learnings and created a message framework for companies to talk about this. Because there is a highly effective way for companies to talk about this publicly to appeal to the broadest range of stakeholders across the political spectrum. And that is by focusing on the material impacts of climate change, physical risks like how extreme weather, like the recent hurricanes in the Southeast that we saw here in the US, how that is impacting your business and your community. It's a direct effect. So when when companies focus on the risks that they are navigating, the opportunities that they are seizing by investing in clean energy and investing in climate solutions, consumers and investors will overwhelmingly see them as being responsible businesses. And those are the types of companies that investors and consumers want to support. The messaging framework is backed by data, and it can really help companies talk about this in a way that will minimize the political backlash, and talk to folks around the world and with different views. We'll share the messaging guide so that you can take a look at that in further detail, and also register for our webinar if you'd like to go to the next slide. Got some details on that here. You'll hear from our CEO, Maria Mendeluce, as well as the head of Potential Energy, John Marshall, and Will Howard, who was our lead researcher on this, and he'll do a deep dive into all of the polling that we learned in the US and also in other geographies. And regardless of the election outcome, we are urging businesses to take confidence in this research and in this messaging framework, because the data was so overwhelmingly clear. And we ask companies to take this back to your relevant departments, your colleagues in communications and marketing, advertising, policy advocacy, and also those teams that are working with your CEOs and CSOs and CFOs on public speeches and appearances where they're having to talk about climate action and the way that it's affecting your business. Your voices matter and have a huge impact in the public narrative and where we are collectively going following the US election results, and also off the back of COP29, which is just around the corner and kicking off very soon. So as world leaders prepare to come together to negotiate on future climate policy and how we're going to finance that transition, your voices coming together loud and clear make a really big difference and give that confidence. I think that is my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, we've got a little bit on COP, actually, my mistake. So just as a teaser for what we'll hear more about later on COP, We Mean Business Coalition will have a presence on the ground in Baku. We will be hosting the Business Pavilion. On the next slide, you can see some details here about the space that we'll be hosting, with a meeting room, with an event space. And we are offering businesses different messaging and advocacy guidance on the policy negotiations that we'll be developing there. Of course, we'll be teaming up with our friends at America's All In on the election responses that we'll be developing potentially in narratives at COP. different events that are being hosted. So please come to us and let me know if you'd be interested in raising your voice at some of the conversations, the events, the policymaker meetings that are happening behind the scenes. We'd love to work with you and ensure that your voices are represented there. And with that, I will pass back to Avery.
Thank you. We did have one question in the chat, Kristen, that I was wondering if I could pass to you, which is Larry said, Bloomberg recently reported that hedge funds are betting against clean energy and clean technology. Could you comment on that? I don't know if that's something tomorrow's webinar would touch on, but wanted to give you a chance to.
Thank you. I say that's a great question for our lead researcher. He was really the mastermind behind a lot of the data setup and questions and testing that we did. So I will take that one back and see if we can get an answer on that in tomorrow's webinar. Thank you so much for the question.
And then someone else asked if the webinar tomorrow would be recorded.
Yes, it will be recorded. I'll just pop my email into the chat here, and if folks are interested in receiving that, just please do drop me a line and I can make sure we get you a copy of that.
Great, thank you all. So now getting back on our timeline that we were talking about, we are now on the election response section, which again, we will see when those results come out, but wanted to share some top line messaging that America's All In is planning on using, and that we will be sharing a full messaging guidance toolkit to our members, but wanted to share some top lines in both scenarios. So first on in a Trump scenario, we'll start there. There is a critical need to remind media, other US climate leaders, international partners of the power of this coalition, reminding folks of the energy, the urgency, and the collaboration that came out of when Trump left the Paris Agreement the first time, and really making sure that we emphasize that we've been here before, we are ready to do it again, and states, cities, businesses, communities are all undeterred and doubling down on their climate action. Next, I think it's really important for us to recognize that we are not in the exact same place as 2017. We have 4 years of climate progress to defend, and many of the benefits of those 4 years and the climate policies at the local, state, and federal levels have delivered jobs, investments in US communities, and with that, a lot of bipartisan support. And so really emphasizing that the clean energy boom, the progress that we have made on climate action is here to stay, and that is because it is good for the country and it is popular. Finally, this one is specifically, especially for international partners, making sure that we reassure them that US climate leadership is not dead, that there are non-federal champions who are fiercely committed to climate action, and making sure that that is something that comes through across the coalition and across our messaging. Next, in a Harris scenario, there's a couple things that we really need to do. First, mark this as an electoral win for climate, and making sure that it is clear that clean energy, climate action was a winning issue in this coalition. We have a window right after the election in which we can really set the narrative for what this election meant for climate action, and we really need to make that case. We also need to continue to remind and educate folks on all of the benefits that are tied to fighting climate change. This isn't just climate on its own. It is the fact that climate action is tied to a thriving economy, good paying jobs, public health, and environmental benefits. And finally, while this we want to set it as a climate win. That does not mean that we should, sit on our laurels, so to speak. We need to combat complacency in this moment and really instill urgency that this is a moment in which there is momentum, and we need to take that momentum and run with it, because in order to combat climate change, we need to go further faster. So there is both a sense of winning the win, but also making sure that urgency and momentum and continuing to drive the climate issue is a part of all of our communications in a Harris scenario. Next, wanted to touch on what this all looks like at COP specifically. So while some of us are going to COP, some of our organizations have a big presence at COP, and some will be, continuing to communicate with domestic audiences. There is a unique opportunity the week after the election where climate will be a conversation topic because of COP29, and we need to make sure that our messaging that America's All In, which has had a very clear role in COPs past, as you can see from the headlines and the photos to the right, that we capitalize on that once again. So making sure that our messaging touches on the fact that our members really understand the urgency of this crisis and continue to do what's needed to be done. Then there's also the fact that America's All In is one coalition within a much broader global subnational movement, and that movement is a powerful one, and that we have global subnational allies who we are learning from, who we are working with, and who all together can use our voices to continue to drive all of the different national governments to continue to be highly ambitious on their climate commitments, with NDCs being a key priority over the next few months. This will be really important to continue to keep up that pressure. And then finally, especially in a Trump scenario, we just need to make clear that cities, states, businesses, communities across the US remain fiercely committed to our national climate targets. And we encourage folks, whether they're going to COP or not, this is an opportunity to educate your audiences about the Paris Agreement and what the benefits of meeting those climate goals or not meeting those climate goals will look like, and making sure that we continue to educate folks on the importance of meeting the different targets within the Paris Agreement. So finally, I just want to end with a couple quick tactics that we would love our members to be a part of. The first one is the all-in sign-on statement. This is something that we have done in the past. Again, this organization came about and made a big splash with its "We Are All In" or "We Are Still In" declaration many years ago. And these are big moments in which we can show the strength of the coalition. And this is something that we're hoping to again release and get some attention around. So we encourage you to reach out directly to your partners, to different folks who could sign on, making sure that your leadership sees this and your organization can sign on. This is not something we're releasing until later this year, so make sure you share it directly, but wanted to amplify that as a good tactic, a good way to, when we release this, for your organization to say, we signed on, we are all in, here's our name on this sign-on letter. And then the next one is just a small tactic that we think can have a good impact. So we've seen in the past that we have had a lot of all-in members create these very quick, very compelling videos that are something along the lines of, Washington, D.C. is all in because we deserve clean air, or something along those lines. Very short. We're planning on collecting these from our different members and kind of creating a supercut that can show visually the same kind of message that we're getting across with our sign-on letter. So this shouldn't take more than a minute. It is something that can be filmed on your iPhone. Just a couple tips. You can do it vertically. Just film it somewhere quiet and well lit, and this is an opportunity for us to show really the strength of the coalition on social and give our partners something to reshare so that we can really amplify our message. So hopefully this is something that folks can do, and you can email it to me at avery.cullinan@americasallin.com. We will be collecting them and creating a kind of supercut, and then we'll encourage you all to share your own individual ones for a big moment in which we can hopefully grasp some attention. So we encourage you to do this. It's worked well in the past. And then finally, we just wanted to share a couple other resources that both we have created, that we have talked about on this call, and that other partners have created. So first, I already shared it in the chat, but wanted to bump that there will be a full deep dive of the brief presentation that Kristen was able to give tomorrow morning. I believe it's 8 a.m. Eastern time. So the link to register for that is in the chat. Next, I wanted to share that Climate Power, for folks who don't know, is a key partner who is really driving a lot of the messaging, the polling. They've done a lot of research on federal and specific state climate policies and the benefits of those. And so in your storytelling, in your work, we encourage you to look at their resources. They plan to do more polling both before and after the election. And they have a lot of great resources. So we just wanted to make sure that you all knew that those existed. And finally, America's All In has both, bear with me while I copy these. We have a toolkit, a digital toolkit here that we encourage you all to use in these moments that I laid out, and also have more robust messaging guidance that's linked in there. So with that, I will stop talking and wanted to open it up for any questions, for you all to share any plans that you have. I saw that Jesse shared in the chat some great work that RMI and All In has been doing around the Clean Energy Academy and their storytelling. So if anyone has any storytelling plans coming up related to the events that we laid out, I just wanted to give a moment for you all to share that, and we can bring you off mute. Jesse, I'm going to allow you to talk.
What a privilege. Thank you, Avery. Great presentation. Yeah, just wanted to re-up this about the Clean Energy Academy, where we've got more than 20 America's All In members getting expert advice on how to implement specific clean energy projects using IRA and federal funding. To Avery's point about taping videos, we are starting to get those roll in. I'll post some links in the chat, but they are really compelling. So I just wanted to underscore what Avery said about this is a really powerful way for our coalition to get out there. And so I'd encourage everyone to do that.
Thanks, Jesse. Anyone else have a hand raised? All right, well, I gave my email in here. I can put it in the chat. Encourage you to reach out if you all have plans. If there's anything America's All In can do to support them, please let us know. And with that, I will pass it to Ryan.
Thanks so much, Avery, and great to be with everybody. Many of you on the call on this webinar right now are going to be on the ground in Baku, or maybe if not going to be on the ground yourselves, working closely with partners in your organizations who will be on the ground at COP. Many others of you have maybe previously attended a COP or are plugged in. So the next part of the webinar is going to go into more detail about the U.S. presence at COP, and particularly the U.S. subnational presence at COP. In part facilitated by America's All In with the help of many close partners. And I'm just going to run through a little bit of up at a high level before tossing it over to Kevin and additional colleagues. Really, the role of U.S. stakeholders at COP, as alluded to earlier in the presentation, has been critically important, particularly over the past half decade plus, as the rules of the Paris Agreement have really been finalized, and as global momentum has shifted from strictly negotiations into really delivery and implementation of an action agenda, and promoting kind of like what all of society potential can deliver as it relates to the clean energy transition. So many U.S. stakeholders will be on the ground to strengthen relationships with both domestic and international counterparts. I think many folks have attuned to the role of COP being obviously a big moment on the international climate calendar, also a forcing mechanism through which various entities might align on major announcements, progress points, and checking in both through public programming and events, and then also smaller convenings of whether those are coalitions, partnerships, and so on and so forth. Particularly at this COP, as Avery teed up, kicks off just a week after the U.S. election, and has been the case with previous U.S. elections. It's one of the major international diplomatic fora, inside or outside of climate, through which a lot of U.S. actors show up, and it'll be the most recent international fora following the U.S. election results, or anticipated U.S. election results. And so a huge role of U.S. stakeholders at COP, this COP in particular, will be providing a fairly live reaction to the U.S. presidential outcome and other federal election outcomes, federal and state election outcomes even, to international colleagues who will be, I think, really curious because of the role that U.S. leadership plays in the global climate community. Just jumping into the next slide. Those of you who are closely following COP might be familiar with many of these key outcomes, but just to outline them here at a high level, really what's on the negotiating agenda of particular importance, this COP includes a new finance goal to deliver on what a shared global target for international climate finance is moving forward. There has been the $100 billion target, which globally we just reached, I think, in 2022. So setting forward what a new quantified finance target is for the international community to help deliver on all of the implementation needs that are required worldwide in order to keep a 1.5 future within reach and within limits. It is also going to be an NDC COP, really, as we move towards COP30. Last year's COP finalized the global stocktake, where we understood the significant gap that really remains between what countries have currently pledged and what science tells us is required in order to really maintain a 1.5 degree trajectory. Additional UN reports, the UN emissions gap report just came out that continues to kind of quantify what those NDC targets, those nationally determined targets, do add up to collectively. And over the course of this COP, really into 2025, and as we look towards COP30, countries are going to be refining what their climate targets are with an eye towards both 2030 and 2035. There's obviously a US role to play in setting an NDC that will be determined in not insignificant detail from the role of subnational actors, but then also what the federal future of the US looks like. But we will see some early movement globally on NDCs over in Baku just in the next couple of weeks. In addition, additional financing commitments on adaptation and loss and damage, which have been remained critically important. The global goal on adaptation isn't under negotiation. The loss and damage fund was stood up just in Dubai last year. Continued political signals of international cooperation is obviously a feature of each and every COP, ideally. But more and more, I think, apt for this audience has been the growing recognition of outside players beyond just national governments, but integrating private sector contributions, private sector finance, and all of the levers that can be pulled from state, provincial, city, and regional governments to really ensure that we are delivering as fast as possible on our global climate objectives. Finally, one thing that we're certainly tracking, speaking with a little bit of a WWF hat on, are the integrations between nature and climate. Many of you might be, or some of you might be aware of the biodiversity COP that's actually happening right now in Colombia. As global leaders, work towards agreement on how to take forward biodiversity efforts and nature commitments. Those are obviously closely integrated with many of our necessary COP outcomes, or climate outcomes, I should say. And then just to be quick, I'll go jumping into the next slide for a snapshot of who will be attending COP29 from the US. Again, in addition to the official US delegation that is led by the federal government, we are tracking a number of kind of like all of society non-federal leaders who will be there, including representatives from tribal nations, a US governor, dozens of state officials from various state agencies that work in environment, climate, and so on. A lot of local leaders from various states, both elected local leaders and then additional city officials. Plenty of, and I saw this in the chat, I think one school in particular shouting it out, but a lot of academic representation, both in folks that work in the research side of things, as well as folks who work in the broader advocacy elements of civil society, large and small businesses, investors, faith groups, healthcare organizations, cultural institutions. Those are all already captured in our America's All-In delegation tracking. We do our best to get a sense of the U.S. actors who will be on the ground at COP. I think we never perfectly capture everybody, but do what we can to help connect some of those dots and give some cohesion to the broad list of U.S. actors, U.S. players who will be on the ground. And then I think I'm going to hand it over to Kevin in just a second, but just the last thing that I'll flag, as many folks are aware of, when it comes to COP, we both have the negotiating agenda and the action agenda. So some of the action agenda in particular is organized in thematic days as we think about what some of the both hard and soft agenda items are on COP. This is the calendar that we're looking at. But I'll use this as a teeing off point to hand it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Ryan. So for everybody on the call now, to sort of give you an overview of what our events programs and agenda will be for the America's All-In Action Center, the pavilion space that we'll be hosting again this year in the Blue Zone. This will be our 7th year having a presence at the COPs, and so we've done it a number of times, but every year is different. It's always in a different country. They always have different priorities, which Ryan just ran through some that the COP presidency in Azerbaijan is prioritizing this year. But we always want to provide a platform for you and other subnational leaders to tell your stories, make your voices heard, connect with counterparts. It's a great opportunity to learn and network, as well as getting the messages out about all of the great climate action that is happening across the U.S. So we'll be supporting folks particularly during week 1. So this will be the first half of COP, and we'll have the America's All-In Action Center operating from November 14th to 16th all day. We've got over 15 events, roundtables, as well as arranging, as we talked about previously, some bilateral meetings. It's a great opportunity actually to meet with federal agency staffs. There'll be many of them there, as well as other subnational, international institutions, whether other local elected officials from the international community, business community, etc. We can help make those connections. Just get in touch with us. You can see the full schedule posted now on our website for the All-In Action Center. We'll be adding additional details as we confirm speakers for each of those events, but you can get a sense now of kind of the broad range of topics that we're going to cover and all of the various hosts and partner organizations that are putting on those events. A huge thank you to, I know some of you are on the call today, who are going to be hosting events at the All In Action Center. Thank you so much for helping us pull together what I think is a strong schedule of events. If you're not making the trip, you can also follow along from here in the U.S. So all of them will be live streamed and recorded on our YouTube page, America's All In. Just search that on YouTube, and you can find those now. You can see we actually have sort of pinned upcoming posts for each of those events now, but you can follow along using those links. I want to go quickly here to a quick Q&A portion, just to give folks who are on the call now to ask some questions if you have general questions about the COP context this year, other things happening, and then we'll sort of wrap the last portion of this. I think we'll get into some more specifics for those of you actually making the trip to COP, cover some of the logistics and additional details for those who will be on the ground. But taking any questions now on COP29 overall, and I will see one, it just vanished there. I had one question from Larry Moffat talking about the Coalition for High Ambition Multi-Level Partnerships. Ryan, that I might pass to you to say a quick word on kind of what the presence or plan is to carry forward that agenda, which was a new initiative launched last year, COP28, that many countries signed on to, focused around collaboration between national and subnational governments.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin. And I did just put an answer in the chat, but I will take the opportunity to speak to it in a little bit more detail here. For folks who are not familiar or not as closely familiar with CHAMP, or the Coalition for High Ambition Multi-Level Partnerships, the U.S. is one of 70 plus countries that has joined this coalition that really seeks to align national target setting with the contributions of subnational actors within their jurisdictions, as well as really obviously promote the role of those actors in implementation, and work to deliver financing and other methods of support to implement national climate targets through those subnational lever points. And so we're very supportive of the US having joined CHAMP and have been really appreciative of the opportunity to partner with them since the initial launch back at COP28, which was facilitated by the COP28 presidency of UAE, as well as Bloomberg Philanthropies. There will be, I think, a number of maybe smaller convenings that bring attention to CHAMP at COP29. I'll do my due diligence to make sure that we have the latest for folks who are particularly of interest in reaching out. And I do know that there will be some other like global CHAMP moments throughout the course of the rest of this year, as well as leading into COP30 and looking at what the potential for additional local leaders in the international fora can look like. So really do appreciate the question and happy to discuss more with anybody.
Great. I do see a question in there for the others who are better at pronouncing, I assume, French. Chaillot Declaration. I confess that's not one that I track. I believe it's around buildings, if that's correct. I do see. I know we have some colleagues from the U.S. Green Building Council on. If I have that right, feel free to drop. Others can drop updates in the chat about that declaration for those following it more closely. Great. Well, in the interest of time, we'll sort of move forward here. And as I noted, so I think this last portion, particularly for those who are going to be traveling to Baku, hopefully this will be useful information for you. So each year we prepare what we call a delegation packet, which goes through all the details that hopefully you'll need to support your trip and engagements around COP. So we'll be sending this out shortly. A couple of things that we'll touch on. So give you some of this context about the importance and major points of negotiation, just sort of at a very high level for what is trying to be achieved at COP29. The venue itself, so you'll see, we'll show a couple on these further slides here in a moment, kind of what the venue will look like, how to get your badge, registering. For those of you who are being badged for the blue zone, you should receive that letter from the UNFCCC. It will have a link that you'll go through just to secure it. Your badge is essentially a PDF letter with a barcode and a confirmation number at the top. You will need to use that to secure a visa. So anyone traveling to Baku, even on an American passport, you are required to have a visa. So that confirmation letter will come with a link to fill out a very short form to access or secure that visa. I've done it so far. It took 5 minutes and then received the confirmation the next day. So hopefully that's a quick turnaround, but be sure to secure that and bring it, that documentation with you. Transportation around Baku is, as you might suspect, always a big topic for any of these COPs. You've got 40,000 plus people coming to various cities and new parts of the world. So we cover some of that here, pulled from the guidance that the COP presidency and Baku themselves have issued on sort of how to get around, some recommendations for that. You'll see the full schedule. We'll be updating that. So you'll have a PDF version of this delegation packet, as well as a link to the live Google document that will be updated as information comes in and we finalize additional details around the Action Center programming. But that'll be there for your reference. You'll have all of our contact information. So there'll be, I think, 5 of us on the ground there across week 1 from America's All In, as well as other partners. So you can get in touch with us. And then as we sort of walk through a little bit at the top here, but we'll have additional messaging guidance that you can reference if you are speaking at events or in meetings or sharing out on your socials with your networks. Some of the key messages we're hoping to convey while they're in Baku. We'll go to the next slide. So it's a quick sort of aerial view of the venue. What's circled here is what will be the blue zone, where our pavilion will be, as well as the other country pavilions. It is an area that it requires as I mentioned, a credential to access. So it's in fact not just this yellow circled area, but that's where the pavilions are, but the other areas as well, where there'll be office spaces and meeting room areas, other exhibitions that'll be across the blue zone. Right across the road there is the green zone. That does not require a credential from the UNFCCC. You do have to register. It is free to register for the green zone. There'll be a number of civil society organizations in there, advocacy groups. We know of some other businesses and corporates from the US who will have a presence in the green zone. So particularly if this is your first COP and you are looking to sort of get the full experience, I would definitely recommend registering and walking around the green zone, because there'll be other connections and interesting stuff happening there that you can experience and take advantage of. The registration links for the green zone are on the COP29 presidency's website. It should be very easy to access there. In that circled area, so here is the aerial view of kind of what the pavilion spaces will look like and where we will be at the All in Action Center, right in the center of center activity. Hopefully we get a busy area here, but our stall number there, G18, is where you can find us. We're still, and we'll add this, I think, to the delegation packet as we find out a couple other key pavilions that we can note. I think in particular the U.S. Center, which will be the official U.S. government pavilion space. I think there'll be a number of events in there across the whole 2 weeks that will be of interest to those of you on this call and others in our delegation. So we'll make sure and highlight that as well on this map in the delegation packet. Go to the next slide. a couple events we just wanted to highlight in addition to providing you again the link to where the full schedule is on our website. So we're going to have an opening event, which really will kick off our 3 days of programming on the 14th at 10 a.m. Really intended to be kind of a showcase of a broad cross-section of U.S. subnational leaders. That will be a space where we are, I think, anticipating making the first public reactions from that panel to the election outcomes, again, assuming we know them at that time. I'll note fireside chat later that day with Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, our co-chair of America's All In, as well as leader from the U.S. Climate Alliance. So I think that will be a very valuable conversation to hear his reflections and hear about his leadership. A couple of town halls that we are organizing with federal agencies in the mornings of Friday and Saturday, 15th and 16th. We'll be circulating and have started to circulate RSVPs for those if you are a subnational institution, organization with interest in meeting with those folks. We will be taking the RSVPs for that. And then one particular that wanted to add onto here that is actually not in our space but is in the U.S. Center on Friday the 15th at 4:45. This will be on our website, but we're hosting a session along with the U.S. Government, really showcasing, again, cross-section of subnational leaders, mayors, corporate sector, state officials in the U.S. Center, talking about the continued importance, no matter the election outcome. We know we're going to be heading into a new administration, but the continued kind of dedication from our coalition, from subnational leaders broadly, to their climate commitments and climate action. And then, of course, depending on what administration that is, we'll be reflecting or responding to that at that time. But would welcome everyone here attending that event. And you can find the details on our site. Next slide. We've put this up a couple times. If you haven't yet and want to be added to our delegation tracking spreadsheet, you've got the link here. Again, that is, I think, most useful for our purposes as we look to either fill out events that maybe you're still looking for a speaker, or invitation to these town halls and roundtables as we're sharing on the previous slide. That's really where we go to figure out who's there when. So if you would like to be added there, you can follow that link. And then in particular for questions about the Action Center event program, support on the ground, other travel logistics and things, reach out to myself or my colleague Hannah. Our emails are here. And I think we'll have a couple moments here at the end for any questions that folks have. We'll scan the chat here briefly. Let's see. Yeah, I see a question on the visa letter. Yeah, it should be a fairly quick turnaround. Previous guidance has been check spam folders or junk folders. Sometimes they end up there. If you don't find it there, there may be a contact in either your UNFCCC credential letter or on the COP29's site itself on the visa application process, a contact email or something like that. I haven't seen it myself directly, but that's what I would think of as the first couple steps to check. See, a couple others have some suggestions of other meetings, events, but great. But hopefully the delegation packet as that goes around and we'll answer most questions. But again, we'll have this webinar recording shared, so you have all the links there as well. And then please reach out to us over email if anything comes up. We're happy to chat one-on-one. right. We'll not see any other questions. Thanks everybody for joining today. Hopefully this was helpful. I know we covered a lot, but you'll have all of this in reference in the slides and the recording. And we're always around.
Thank you.